Well, good morning everyone, and welcome to another fine day in the beautiful sunny city of Seattle, Washington, West Coast, United States of America. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you will know that I am a big fanboy when it comes to Ducatis, and I've owned many Ducatis, so many Ducatis that I don't think I could name them all easily, but maybe that's a whole entire separate video. But despite all of the Ducatis that I've owned, I have never ridden a Ducati Scrambler. And there's no real reason for that. I just, I don't know, when they first came out, I was, great engine, still that wonderful L-twin platform, air-cooled, or in some cases air and engine-cooled engines. Still a premium motorcycle, just never really caught my desire. But lately, as I get older, and I find myself sort of wanting to spend my more leery moments, i.e. my more sporty moments, on the track as opposed to on the street, I find myself more attracted to street motorcycles that are just a little bit more easygoing around town. Now, you might say, yeah, Angus, you're riding a Street Fighter V2 right now. Well, yeah, but I suppose as far as Ducatis go, this is more easygoing around town. Certainly is compared to the V4 Street Fighter and other bikes they do. And yeah, I do have a scooter as well. I have a Piaggio scooter that I like to mosey around on town on. And up until recently, I had a Triumph Bonneville, which I liked, but it just didn't tickle my fancy. I suppose I'm not sort of the curly mustached skinny jeans type hipster that those bikes tend to be attracted to. I hope I'm not offending anyone. They're great bikes, but I just found wasn't really my style. I'm more sport than super cruiser cafe retro-y thingy. So anyway, a long way of saying I've become a Scrambler-curious, specifically Ducati Scrambler-curious. Again, I like Triumph motorcycles, don't get me wrong, I really like the Street Triple and the Speed Triple, but when it comes to Scramblers, I'm just more Ducati Scrambler-curious. So today I am going to ride the Ducati Full Throttle, the 2025 model, and I'll talk all about that in a bit when we get there. And I'm also going to ride the Ducati Scrambler 1100 Sport Pro, which is a more focused, sporty Scrambler, bigger engine, has Öhlins and more horsepower and all that fun stuff. Now, you might say they're not a fair comparison. They probably aren't. They're kind of different bikes, but they're both in the Scrambler range. And for me, as someone that appreciates the sporty side of riding, I'm curious as to how much sportier this 1100 is compared to the Full Throttle or the Night Shift, which is the other model they do. And there's the Icon, which is their entry-level model. Now, the Night Shift and the Full Throttle, the only real difference is the bars. The Night Shift has more of a flat track style bar, and it doesn't have a quick shifter, and it does have the 2B slip-on exhaust that the Full Throttle has. And the Full Throttle also has more of a traditional bar set, more of a higher up bar set. But this 1100 Evo is, Öhlins. It's got twin cylinder, twin disc brakes on the front, Brembo brakes. It's just a bit more serious, I think. Well, we're going to find that out in a moment. How nice does that sound? Oh, makes me smile. Nothing quite like the sound of a Ducati L-twin in flight. Okay, so let's get to it. I have been Scrambler-curious for a long time, and man, this 1100 Sport Pro just looks so beautiful. But at the back of my head, I'm a bit skeptical about how it's going to feel if it doesn't have the Evo engine in it. But that's not what I'm riding first. I'm riding the Ducati Full Throttle, and I just love the new colorway. This gold and black just always looks great on motorcycles, and I think this new colorway looks much nicer than the red and black colorway they had of a 2024 model. You can see you've got your 2-mo slip-on exhaust, just a single disc on the front, and unlike the 1100 here, which has the wider sort of flat track bars, here you've got more of a traditional upright bars. So I'm 6 foot, and obviously I can swing a leg over it pretty easily, and turn her on. Hello.
Okay, so starting up the Ducati Scrambler Full Throttle, you definitely hear the 2-me exhaust, or the slip-on exhaust, that lets you know this thing has a bit more attitude, which is cool, and that's something that I'm very familiar with for Ducati L Twins. It has a sort of pulse to it, sort of rough around the edges, but in a really good way. It's not your average commuter twin. It's still got soul, and even at idle, you could hear it when I started it up. And I'd say the riding position, just first impressions, it's low and sporty. The seat is flat, the bars are pretty straight, and you're naturally leaning into the ride. It feels really compact, but very purposeful, almost like a tracker bike that's sort of snuck onto the road, I suppose. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think I said that powering this Full Throttle is the Evo 3 Desmodoo L Twin, which is 2 valves per cylinder, has the Desmodronic valve actuation, and a heritage, frankly, that goes back decades. It's really one of the last old school air-cooled Ducatis that you can buy these days. It's got that old school architecture with the modern tuning, and you know, in this setup it makes just over 70 horsepower, so not a huge amount of power. You're not going to be winning any races with this bike. Now, I would say that while the numbers don't sound wild on paper, but on the road they're exactly what you want, I think, for sort of real-world fun. Its torque comes in early, around 3,000 RPM. It sort of starts pulling, and it carries through pretty cleanly. So far I haven't had any sudden spikes, just kind of usable linear power. It's very easy to modulate, but it's sounds pretty nice when you twist the throttle. When you think about this bike, you know, this really is kind of an urban mid-speed feel. This is not the bike you're going to take interstate. It's not the bike you're going to take for, you know, hundreds of miles a day, or you could, but you know, really this thing is the in-city or medium speeds on the back road type bike. I think that's kind of where it lives. The throttle response is pretty clean, and in the sport mode there's no delay, no ride-by-wire weirdness. It's definitely responsive without being twitchy. The clutch pull is light, the gearbox feels pretty smooth, and compared to earlier generations of this engine, the fueling feels pretty well mapped. It doesn't sort of stumble at low RPM. You can roll through roundabouts, and I think I get a sense that in light traffic it should be pretty good. Now this has a short wheelbase, and so the steering is pretty quick. It has a relatively steep brake, and I'd say that the full throttle tips in, kind of feels right now as I'm tipping in now, it's barely a push. It's a bike that wants to be moved around, not just sat on. So that's pretty cool for a bike in this category, I think. Now the suspension is handled by a 41mm Kayaba fork up front, and that's and has a preload adjustable Kayaba monoshock in the rear. So it's not adjustable beyond preload, but it's well tuned, I think, for this kind of riding. This is the kind of ride the bike's built for, sort of fast street work, daily commuting, that sort of thing. It definitely feels firm enough to hold a line in a quick corner. I mean, it is a Ducati after all. I think if you're maybe a little bit heavier or riding two up, you might want to stiffen up the rear preload, but for solo riding, for me at 210 pounds so far has been pretty balanced. And I think that's largely also thanks to the steel trellis frame, which I think probably flexes just enough to keep things engaging. It definitely doesn't feel dead or over-engineered. I definitely feel connected to it. Now so far the braking feels pretty good. The braking on this bike is handled, I think it's a 330mm single disc up front with a 4-piston radial caliper, and that's plenty. It's pretty hard to find a bike with bad brakes these days, and the brake on this is pretty progressive. Ducati have a cornering ABS which comes standard, and it'll unobtrusively kick in if you overcook a line or a trail brake too deep. Out back brakes is a 245mm disc with a single piston caliper again, but that's more than enough, I think, for this weight and power. So who is this one for? I think, well, the Full Throttle really honestly is a wide range of riders. I think if you're coming off a smaller displacement bike and want something with more performance and prestige, it's a great step up. And I think if you're experienced but want a second bike that's fun, good looking and easy to live with, then it's a pretty good niche too. Now I talked about the rider modes earlier, sport modes. It's a pretty simple electronic suite, but it has 2 ride modes, road and sport. The sport mode I'm in right now sort of sharpens the throttle and dials back the traction control. And I'm finding like right now I'm just in a little parking lot, just sort of give it a little bit of a test. I always like the parking lot test when I'm riding on a test ride, just to see how things feel and just sort of maneuvering around the city. Really like, even in sport mode, sometimes in sport mode when you're doing low speed maneuvers it can be a bit jerky for a lot of bikes, but on this bike it feels great. You've got a 4.3-inch color TFT, which is pretty intuitive. The dash is actually pretty refreshingly simple. There's no sub-menus buried sort of 3 layers deep.
Okay, so now it's time to ride the fire-breathing but gorgeous looking Scrambler 1100. Now, everyone I've spoken to is telling me I'm going to be disappointed, but I've got to kind of make that decision for myself. So let's take it out for a ride and see how it feels. Okay, automatically, the seat height's about the same. Bit of rumble. It's got a different rumble to it.
Alright, so getting on board these 2025 Scrambler 1100 Sport Pro, at a glance it really looks the part. It's blacked out, it's got the Olin suspension, a flat rear tyre and the chassis, the classic sort of Desba dual engine, so it's got presence and you feel it straight away. I've been told that once you start riding it you might be less impressed, it might quite be the hooligan machine that the styling wants you to believe it is. So let's see sort of how it feels. Now, if you remember the original Monster 1100 Evo or the Hyper Motard 1100 Evo, those are incredible engines. Now this is not the Evo engine, so let's start with that. It is a 1079 air and oil cooled twin, so 2 valves per cylinder, and it's built around that heritage. And yeah, it sounds good. But here's the thing I'm curious about. It's not the same engine that powered the Hyper Motard 1100 Evo, and that motor was raw and revier and alive. I would say so far, just heading out of the parking lot here, this version feels tamer, and I think it's probably because it's more emissions compliant, which can frankly dull things a little bit. Now they say that it still makes around 86 horsepower and 65 pounds-feet of torque, I think. Let's see how it's feeling as we sort of get a little bit of space here. I mean, I would say so far the delivery feels kind of muted, but I would have expected more of a big twin hit just straight out the back. You can always feel that with the Ducati. You don't even need to ride very far. and especially down low. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's kind of a flatness in the mid-range already. So for a bike that looks like it wants to punch out of the corners and bark its way through tunnels, it kind of feels a little bit too civilized already. Now, I talked a little bit about air and oil cooling setup that it has, and I get the appeal, no radiator, fewer moving parts, cleaner silhouette, has that sort of classic thinned aesthetic. I think these days in practice it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think the good is that it keeps the bike simple, mechanical, easy to service, it keeps the weight down, well, at least on paper it does. The bad, in my experience with Ducatis, is that the heat management is always going to be an issue, especially in traffic or stop and go situations, because this engine's going to get hot, and not just a little warm. I'm talking thigh roasting levels of heat bleeding out from the rear cylinder and the exhaust routing, and that can make urban riding a real chore. And I think I'm already feeling that in this engine, and it's actually not that hot today. So let's do a bit of we'll do some throttle roll-ons and just get a feeling for the throttle. My biggest gripe so far is the fueling. I think for a premium bike in 2025, this thing shouldn't stumble off idle or surge when you're trying to hold a steady speed for a long corner. So let's just see how we feel when we get through the lights here and just get a feeling for it. I'm in sport mode. And it's pretty abrupt, actually, I would say, but not in a good way, not in a good sort of sharp way. It's more like a lurchy sort of feeling. Now the other mode it has is German mode, so I'm going to just pop into German mode now. This set of lights, just rolling stop here. And things are smoothing out a little bit, but now it feels kind of sluggish, so I'd say between the modes I'm sort of searching for a middle ground that kind of isn't there. And this isn't unique to Ducati, by the way. A lot of air-cooled bikes struggle with emissions-related throttle compromises, but it's kind of disappointing at this price point to see it here. Now, to be fair, the chassis itself is solid. The trellis frame traditionally on these bikes has always had very good flex, and the Olin suspension, while stiff, hasn't been set up for my weight. It's just a test ride. It's nicely controlled. Like braking right now, just sort of trail braking, you can feel that the front holds up, and it feels planted and confident. But then you realize it's also heavy. It's around 417 pounds dry. And that weight sits high, so flicking it side to side is going to take some effort, I think. I mean, it's stable, but I don't think it's going to feel super agile. It's not the sort of bike you throw around, it's something sort of bike you lean deliberately. And I think that's fine if you're on open sweepers, but if you're chasing sort of apexes or changing direction quickly, it's going to start to feel pretty sluggish. And when you look at other bikes in this category, I mean, at this price, it's almost $18,000 US. You could buy a Ducati Street Fighter V2 for that. So you kind of got to ask the question, like, where does this bike sit? But the brakes are excellent. It's got Brembo M4 monoblocks up front, twin 320mm front discs on radial master cylinder. It's got plenty of stopping power. Honestly, they're one of the best parts of the bike, I think. You get 3 riding modes, cornering ABS, all of that stuff. And the LCD is fine, the dash is fine, but after riding the newer 803 Scramblers, like the one we just rode, the full throttle, with that clean TFT display, this one feels kind of like it's stuck in 2015, if I'm honest. So, who's the bike for? I'd say the bike is for a rider who wants a Ducati that looks old school and feels substantial, but isn't chasing lap times. I think, again, this is kind of just a short ride, but I've been riding these bikes, these engines, for a long time. And I would say, if you like torque over horsepower, sort of sound over stats, and can live with the quirks, kind of an exchange for the personality that it has, because it's a cool looking bike. Great. It's not a commuter. It's not particularly well suited to really tight technical riding, but I'd say on a Sunday cruise through fast sweepers, I think it'll give you sort of a visceral kind of analog experience, I suppose. And that's harder to find these days with modern bikes. You just have to be okay with the heat, and a motor that kind of looks meaner than it is, I suppose. And I know maybe this part of the review sounded a little bit negative, but let's just listen to this engine. I mean, it does sound awesome. It's definitely a Ducati. So, you know, I don't want to like folks to walk away from this thinking that I think it's a shit bike. It's not a shit bike. It's just, I don't think it's an $18,000 bike. The sort of person that's going to buy this wants a retro sort of muscle bike, I suppose. And on paper, it checks a lot of boxes. You know, it has the Ohlins, the Brembos, the big twin, but I feel like it's caught in this awkward middle ground because it's not as raw as the Hypermotard 1100 was, and it's not as modern as the new gen monsters, and it's not as fun as you want it to be for the money. So what I'd really like to see Ducati do, if they're going to build a true air-cooled street fighter, they should bring back the Evo motor with a bit more fire. That would be something. Until then, I think the 1100 Scrambler is good, but it's not great. It's stylish, but it's slightly over-compromised, and it's definitely more about the vibe than the ride. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this puppy. So here are my thoughts on the Scrambler lineup. It's a funny thing with Ducati. About 15 years ago, you could argue that they sort of ushered in the first of the Italian-inspired retro kind of hipster cool bikes, right? They had the Sport Classic 1000, the 1000 GT, the Paul Smart edition, just some really cool bikes. And they only made them for a short time. I actually owned a Sport Classic. And then, you know, you saw Triumph, especially Triumph, really up the ante with their, you know, modern retro Bonnevilles and Speed Twins and all of those wonderful motorcycles that they've made. And it's almost like Ducati are a little bit ahead of their time. And they've kind of struggled to find their mojo in that Pacific segment since. Now, I'm not saying that Scramblers aren't great bikes, because I think they're really cool. I'd actually have one in my garage for just cruising around the city, but if I'm honest, I prefer my Vespa for that. And, you know, the Full Throttle, the new Icon, the Night Shift, that new series of their modern Scrambler bikes are really fun. And I think they're priced about right. This 1100 though, just honestly, it's not shit, but not great. And then of course, you know, you had the modern monsters, which I think are fantastic. I have a sort of a emotional connection to monsters. But then of course the fantastic Street Fighters. The V2 Street Fighter is the same price as that 1100 Sport Pro that I just rode. And you know, I have a V2 Street Fighter in the garage, and I'd buy that a million times over that bike. I suppose the challenge really is, come on Ducati, let's give us something cool, rideable, and around the right price point again. Something that kind of sits between, I suppose, what we have now and maybe the Monster, or somewhere between the Monster and the V2. I mean, I think the Monster is still continued, honestly, because it's just such an emotional product for the company. It's a product that saved the company, and I get that, and I love that, and I respect that. But there's a little bit of confusion, I think, in the lineup of bikes. So that's my take on it. I'm really curious as to what your take is. And if you're liking this content, give me feedback, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you again on the next video. Thanks.